is Let Me Sum Up, your regular deep dive into recent reports on climate and energy. I'm Luke Menzel, recording on Wurundjeri land, and I'm joined today by my two co-hosts, the Global Vice President for Marketing and Extortion at the Let Me Sum Up podcast, Frankie Muscovich. Hello, Frankie.
Good afternoon, gents. I feel like the title Marketing and Extortion has a particular weight to it in current global affairs, and I'd just like it noted for posterity that the nature of extortion that I'm undertaking on our collective behalves is all for the benefit.
Are you saying that you're extorting for good and not evil, Frankie?
That is 100% what I'm saying. I just want that noted for the record here and now before we get into it.
I couldn't tell you the exact episode number that I hit upon this title for you, but it must be at least 90 episodes ago, I reckon. So, way to insert a little explainer.
That's right.
So everybody's clear on that point.
Extorting for good these last 3 years or so, just in case you were wondering.
The Let Me Sum Up podcast, utilising the techniques of the criminal underclass for good and not evil.
I was not really proposing to draw in the extended metaphor for the purpose of this conversation and raising that just now, but thank you for doing it anyway, Menzel.
We are also joined by a man who recently memorialised his love of Dungeons and Dragons in the form of a very elaborate Lego set. It is Tennant Reid. G'day, Tennant.
Why, hello. And yes, it is a very elaborate set. Anybody who has been on a Zoom call or webinar with me lately may have seen a great big red dragon in the corner of my screen. And the thing about this set is it's the official tie-in Lego Dungeons and Dragons set. It has a lot of secrets hidden in it. And some of them are going to be quite difficult to access because I've also installed shiny lights all through it. They're very low energy requirement lights. So my Dungeons and Dragons set not contributing at this stage to the global energy crisis.
Highly efficient bling lights for your Dungeons and Dragons Lego set, Kenneth.
That's right. That's right. And I don't think we're going to see any authorities recommending downgrading bling in the materials that we discussed today.
Well, we'll get to that because on this week's show, we look at a handy-dandy new guide from the IEA that sets out a bunch of sensible things that could be done on the demand side to lessen the impact of the current global energy crisis. But first, well, it's the global energy crisis. War rages on in Iran, and the endgame is as opaque as ever. However, with both sides now targeting critical energy infrastructure, it is becoming clear that even if the war ended tomorrow, the implications for global energy supply chains will reverberate for years. Right, Tennant?
Yeah. And so I think when we last spoke about this, we said, who knows what's going to happen? And it's a good thing we did because a bunch of quite surprising things did happen subsequently. And as we record, I personally have gone through a roller coaster over the last few days of expectation changes where at first it looked like the Americans were starting to look for the exits and Trump, getting ready to say, who cares about this whole thing anyway? We won. Let's get out of here. But then, the Israelis got bombed in the main nuclear weapons development lab's hometown. The Iranians were threatened with absolute obliteration of their electricity system within, as we record, 24 hours. By the Americans. It could all be escalating massively, and there are said to be significant American troop deployments underway, but 2 to 3 weeks away from reaching the theatre of war. And so it could all be escalating horribly when there was a bit of a bad escalation a week ago or so. The Israelis bombed the biggest gas field in Iran, and the Iranians responded by bombing or drone and missile striking the biggest LNG liquefaction facility in Qatar. And then everybody looked at all the extremely vulnerable, extremely hard to replace energy infrastructure in their own country and said, maybe let's step back a little bit from that. And that stepping back appears to have lasted 1 week.
But hasn't Trump in the last 24 hours said, open the strait or we're bombing all of your energy generation plants or infrastructure?
Starting with the biggest one, which is a nuclear plant.
Good God.
Yes, so that would be bad. And literally as we're recording, there are explosions across Tehran with Israeli strikes on something. And so it's all rapidly evolving. It's all very horrible and deeply concerning in all kinds of ways. But, disciplining ourselves like the human-computer mentats in the Dune novels, we can just take in and process information and spit it out. And the things that are not going to go away as a result of whatever does or doesn't happen in the next 24 hours is the damage already done. And of all that, I think the two biggest things, apart from the lasting reputation of the entire Middle Eastern region as a secure source of anything, are the damage to Qatar LNG and the damage to Iranian gas production. And on the LNG front, Qatar Energy have indicated they may need to call force majeure on their LNG supply contracts to China and Italy and I think Belgium and a few others for up to 5 years. Now, maybe they will revise that down. Maybe there's a second strike and the number goes up. But as it is, it looks like a serious lasting disruption to the global gas market. Qatar supplies about 20% of world LNG. LNG is only a portion of global gas supply. Most gas is sent to market through pipelines. But this is arguably the LNG glut story has just got blown up along with that facility, and the possibility that I was treating seriously the idea that Australia's LNG facilities might not be able to fully contract for following their current contracts, most of which expire for the East Coast in the mid-2030s, because there was going to be a lot of gas around and the Americans were very aggressively promoting their own gas, and maybe people would just say, we won't contract. Well, I think Australia looks a little more attractive and also not exploded right now.
And also just far, far away from where shit's going down.
That's right. Yes, we are a haven of peace and security as of 4 p.m. on Monday, the 23rd of March, 2026.
Oh, boy. Should we get into a bit of what's been happening here in response to all of that? Because there's been a lot going on, and I'll admit I'm not super close to a lot of it, but obviously, huge focus from domestic watchers on what's the situation on supply for Australia, what have been the flow-on consequences to that to date here, and so far it's been reasonably moderate. Like Minister Bowen appeared on Insiders over the weekend. I think that's sort of at least the most recent commentary I've seen, and suggested that I think something like 6 of 80 ships leaving parts of Asia, I think, have been delayed. In terms of oil, this is not gas. But they're looking at alternatives, and so far that's, not crazy. Like, I think the stronger concern so far has been more on the demand side, and and folks, like, particularly in areas where the supply chain is either more concentrated or at the end of sort of complex supply chains, particularly in regional areas, that there are kind of shortages starting to show up. And that seems to be driven, a little bit by what's being described as panic buying, but you could also describe that as a rational kind of decision to shore up supplies in the face of potential risks there in the long run going into a harvesting season and things like that. So significant to see some structural moves from government in appointing Anthea Harris as a fuel security
task force
coordinator.
Coordinator.
That will be interesting to see what she does there. And, I think we've sort of been commenting this week, Australia is playing host to Fatih Birol, Dr. Fatih Birol, head of the International Energy Agency, who've just put out a report we'll be chatting about more. And, I did not expect to be saying these words, in March 2026, but the idea of a super profits tax on gas exports seems to be a live prospect again as well, which is, just wild times, right? Which one of those do you want to lean into?
Well, I think we should talk about the potential tax reform agenda that is emerging coming out of all of this. There's a lot of vibes emerging from the federal government saying, yes, this is a crisis. This might also be the time to, make the case for some big reforms. But just to stick with the appointment of Anthea Harris to that fuel czar role for a moment, there was a meeting of ECMC last week, and there was a communique that was released last Friday. So this was the Energy and Climate Change Ministerial Council Energy Ministers subgroup, and it had very strong COVID vibes, actually. So yes, Anthea has been appointed, but many of the levers that are available to, manage the demand side of supply-demand imbalance, they sit at the state level. And so in some ways what is occurring is that governments around the country are moving into overdrive, and while this is absolutely a national issue, there is a strong imperative for the national government to work with state governments to manage it. So this communique, which I'm sure we can link to in the show notes, sort of sets out the joint position, but then goes one by one through a summary of recent actions for the Commonwealth and all the different states and territories in terms of how they're managing this crisis. So interesting in the sense, as these crises seem to be coming around more regularly, you can see the Federation also developing some muscle memory for how to respond to them, and some of the same patterns of coordination and collaboration that we've seen just in the last few years, and most notably through COVID, I think are starting to leap back into action. It
will be interesting to see, what comes through the early focus of that work. And I think you could well expect it to focus on the things that can be done immediately and should be prioritised, and potentially both from a demand and supply perspective. But I think this is sounding so much like Groundhog Day from our COVID era chats. You really don't want to waste the crisis when it comes to things you might bed down or further or start to put into train that goes to the point you're making there, Luke, around the fact that we seem to find ourselves in these situations now on a rolling 18-month basis, actually having an eye to longer-term, more structural reforms that would see us more resilient to these kind of shocks in future feels like an imperative and something that should be pushed for in the next little while, in parallel and alongside the things that should happen now.
I agree with that. You don't want to waste a crisis, but the measures that people want to put forward or progress in that need to be, in a disciplined way, actually responsive to the crisis, which doesn't mean only things that will pay off within what we imagine might be the duration of the current crisis. Absolutely things that will put us in a better position to be resilient to future risks of oil supply interruption. Have an absolutely valid place in this, even if, standing up a green ammonia industry is definitely not going to happen on a time frame that is going to help with the challenges of this crisis. But also, clearly, there is a value in having a source of ammonia for fertilizer and explosives for mining that is not tied into fossil energy supply chains in a really close way. Like a similar logic has led China to foster, at considerable expense in various forms of subsidy, a coal to petrochemicals industry that in some ways right now is standing it in good stead, albeit very filthy good stead. We should certainly consider things that are longer term along the way. And if I had to make a pitch for one thing that is relevant to all timeframes and might take some gumption to put forward, but is absolutely relevant to this crisis, it is that getting stuff built for energy has a national security dimension now, a more obvious one, not just a matter of fights between some transmission company over there and some aggrieved local residents for which everybody else is a bystander. Actually, we all have a stake in scaling up clean electricity supply as fast as possible so that we can move as much as practical of our energy services needs over from fuels that are at risk to electricity that we can produce at home.
So yes to that, but also to the fuel switching on the demand side that is able to make use of that.
Yeah.
Clean electricity. So those two things need to happen in tandem. Yeah. There's another shoe that is potentially hurtling towards the ground. I'm looking to you two to tell me whether that is indeed the case, which is what's going on with gas prices. We talked about the destruction of energy infrastructure. Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Like at the moment, not very much. Given that what we're talking about in terms of like the implications for global supply, potentially reverberating for months, if not years, what should we expect to happen to local gas prices? Is that something that we should be concerned about?
I would say yes.
I would say yes, like at the simplest possible level. If you're looking at significant disruption to supply elsewhere, the supply that continues to exist elsewhere will have a premium attached to it. And probably the interesting thing will be around contracting for that over the longer term, I think, to Tennant's point there. I mean, the thing that I don't have any good sense of is when you're likely to see the early signs of that starting to flow through, because there is a little bit of a disconnect there, isn't it? Like there is some urgency in some of the policy interventions and conversations that's going to be had in the coming weeks, and sort of few months. And if the sort of price signal being one of the logical kind of stimulus to which you have actions put in place to respond to isn't there, then, like there's a risk that the urgency to get on with some of that might not be there to the same extent as on, the more immediate impacts to, say, oil supply that people are seeing at the moment. I don't know, like, Tennant, do you have a view on when you would expect to see price impacts coming through?
So I cannot overemphasize how much I don't know and am deeply befuddled. But that said, and for what it's worth, if you look at the ACCC's published metric of the netback price of gas, which is the international export value of short-term, not long-term contracted gas, minus the costs of getting that gas to export in Australia. That price is $12 a gigajoule for March 2026, and it's $19.23 a gigajoule in May 2026, because there is a lag even in that sort of very spot-based metric. These short-term contracts or supply agreements are laid in a little bit ahead of time. So now local prices have not been tracking netback closely in the last couple of years. They've been a little closer to the oil-based equivalency price. They are not close to that oil-based equivalency price right now. They haven't been moving suddenly. I would be startled if they didn't go up in the next few months. Mm. But the federal government did go through the process of instituting a mandatory gas code of conduct, which was intended, among other things, to insulate the local market from international pressures with this price anchor and commitments of local supply, hell or high water, made by major producers in order to be exempted from some of the provisions of that code. And was that enough to disconnect? Well, we're living through an experiment right now, and we'll see. But I wouldn't be getting too comfortable that gas prices are definitely going to stay around the sort of $11 to $13 mark that they've been bounded in for the last 2.5 years or so.
Hold on to your hats.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to skip over the
super profits
emergent conversation on a super profits tax here, which
everything's coming up, Bathan.
It is.
Indeed, it is.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Yes, 2 episodes back, we talked about a clever set of ideas from the Superpower Institute for a gas-based rent tax. Now more than ever, a government might go, there's a lot of cash there, grab it.
And a unique set of political circumstances that, you'd probably be hard-pressed to think of a situation in which they'd be more likely to see something like this sail through. There's a couple of things here, right? The argument for having a super profits tax has been well made and should have been done a while ago. So, in a sense, we don't, as we covered in that conversation, we don't see enough tax take on our exports compared to other OECD countries. And we are in a situation where the budget is in some pretty dire straits in terms of structural deficits. And this is one area where meaningful reform is overdue. And I think interesting to reflect on the domestic politics around this too, right? We know that because it's important what people out there think of these things, aside from the affected industries who are clearly not happy at the prospect of something like this coming in. But this is pretty widely supported in the electorate and across the political spectrum. So my view would be the government will be taking quite a bit of comfort from that and feeling like the circumstances, that we find ourselves in mean that there's more of an imperative than there's been in a long time to get something like this done. I would also say it is very significant that this is the Prime Minister's department that's requested the analysis. And just from watching some of the coverage today of Dr. Birol's speech at the press club in Canberra, all of this will be old news by the time people are listening to this. But there were multiple, opportunities for this to be sort of shut down in that session with questions being directed, and it wasn't. So it's definitely on. So the question is, does the government's resolve hold through the budget from here on out? And what's the design of the specific thing that they're thinking of? Like, we've seen one proposal from the Superpower Institute in a two-way cash flow tax. There are other suggestions out there for sort of simpler measures on taxing a proportion of exports. Like, there's different ways you could skin this gassy cat.
Like, that's true. And my two quick, I swear, thoughts here are that, one, the detail does really matter, and you want to be confident that what you've designed amidst a crisis is not going to turn out 6 months later to, in the circumstances of the time, not actually raise anything, which has happened to previous rent tax designs.
Yep.
And you also want to be confident that it's not going to do the thing that its detractors will claim that any version of it will do, which is to kill investment and see everyone flee overseas. It's much harder to see people fleeing overseas when they're going to get blown up overseas. There's like more room to treat them mean in a circumstance where the world is going to hell in a handbasket, but still you do want to be, you want to know if you're being mean and not inadvertently do it. And then the second thought is, there is a large sum, but still a limited sum to be extracted from these activities. And there is an interaction between profits taxes and carbon constraints, carbon prices, and reservation and allocating gas itself to people. And like, the sum of all those impacts needs to achieve the Colbert maximum extraction of feathers with the minimum of hissing from the goose maxim. They do have to be thought about together.
Yes. And in terms of, what I agree appears to be a pretty unique political moment to engage with this set of topics. Of course, there's the macro and the micro, and there's the impact on households in particular themselves, voters themselves. And of course, a big part of the Superpower Institute's case was that large swathes of this revenue should be directed to compensation payments for households and also support for households to electrify, to reduce their exposure to this. And so while a lot of attention needs to be paid to the big picture design of this policy, just as much attention needs to be paid on, how we're supporting households through this transition. And that in itself is quite a complex piece of policy design. And I suppose it's lucky that there's been a lot of thinking going on within the federal government over the last couple of years in the context of the National Energy Performance Strategy around some of the ways that households could be supported on that journey. But important, I think, to make sure this is not just a story about compensation, but a story about transition, so that we're moving households off those fossil fuels over time and not missing the opportunity for that kind of structural change on the demand side as well as the supply side.
And starting and prioritising the cohorts that have less agency in this themselves and means. And I think that's really important. And it kind of struck me, I think the report we're about to talk about acknowledges up front that there were huge kind of efforts put to bear during COVID along these lines to support households from energy cost increases and things like that. And the ability of governments to do that now is much diminished. Like, Australia's not unique in the sense that the budget and fiscal constraints are pretty tight on all of this. So I think there's anyway. So the conversation on new revenue definitely needs to be accompanied by where do the safety nets need to be in place that aren't, because that's not the conversation we've been having yet. Like there's been, government has definitely resisted the idea of things that have been in the zeitgeist in recent times around cutting fuel excise and things like that. So anyway, it's complex time, and like you want to seize the moment, right? But you also, we've got to make sure we get as much of this right as possible, and we don't design something in a really short, contracted time frame that has, some unintended consequence down the line.
All right. Shall we chat about a report?
Yes, let's get ready for a radical change of pace.
Did you enjoy your fuel crisis entree? Onto fuel crisis mains.
Yum, yum.
Yum, yum, yum.
One of the International Energy Agency's roles is to coordinate efforts to cushion the impact of global oil shocks. Indeed, just a couple of weeks ago, IEA member countries released 400 million barrels of oil from their strategic reserves to help address oil supply constraints caused by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. However, the IEA is keen that governments are aware of every tool in the policy toolbox that could help address the current crisis, which is why they have rush-printed a new report titled Sheltering from Oil Shocks, Measures to Reduce Impacts on Households and Businesses. In it, they set out 10 policy options for moderating demand of oil and gas in the short term, whilst providing some commentary on the actions we can take to improve the underlying resilience of the global economy so it is less vulnerable to these sorts of shocks in the future. Timely stuff, right, Frankie?
I thought this was a fascinating bit of messaging and comms from the IEA. And I want to hark back to our conversation. It would have been in the last couple of episodes where we were discussing the recent kind of push from the US to shake its fist at the IEA saying, you crazy net zero loving folks, like we want you to forget all that net zero crap and refocus on things like this. It's super interesting context for this piece of work, because I could imagine, and I think it is absolutely right for them to be rush printing something that can be used to bolster government's resolve to do some stuff in the very short term, that it is focused on, things that could be implemented within a matter of weeks. But I could also imagine a version of this report that gives equal prominence or weight to some of the longer-term considerations here, which, unsurprisingly, go to things that the three of us bang on a lot about, like electrification of gas and oil usage in homes through cooking, and cars through uptake of EVs, and heavy transport and sustainable aviation fuel, and kind of all the hard but necessary longer term shifts that we need to be engendering. And I think it was very notable that that part of the report, which there is still messaging and commentary included on, but I would say it's not at all prominent, and it exists, without kind of bolded text and headlines and, being a substantial part of the document. It's right at the end and presented as a bit of, and by the way, you should think about these things in the longer term. That to me looks like a market shift. I would, though, kind of hasten to say I think it's really good that they've put a piece of workout like this that kind of identifies those near-term steps. It's just very interesting to see the difference in positioning around some of this. So the other thing, which is just interesting to reflect on when we should get into the things that they're talking about, is that the IEA itself, like in this report, reflects on the fact that they were founded in response to the 1970s oil crisis. And I think you would...
IEA OG.
This is exactly back to basics. You talked about muscle memory. This is like a really clear example of one of these big international bodies that, in recent times has had its eye, I think, very firmly on the future and back solving for where we're heading. So it's very interesting seeing a body like this, sort of leaning in and seeking to play a key role at a time of crisis, and the way that their posturing is a little different. So I don't know, should we work through some of the things that they're telling us to do? It's all very, you can tell they've done this very quickly, but it's...
Let's put on a nice warm cardigan and settle down for some top tips on saving energy.
They do. So they've limited it to a sort of top 10 and very specifically around demand side options and open, kind of across the board of end users from households, businesses, governments, to kind of large business end of things as well. And the thing that's challenging about some of the things on this is a lot of them are behavioural and not necessarily things that I think would be easy to enforce. I was reading these. I'm like, these are great ideas. My God, I can't imagine Australians leaning into this necessarily. There's a bit of a mind shift that's necessary here.
The vibe of this is this is a great idea. If everybody did this, this would save between 3 and 5% of oil use, but no, that's not going to happen. Everybody's not going to do that, so it's not going to save that much unless there is kind of a strong intervention from government to drive that activity.
Yeah, and so some of them definitely are only doable with strong intervention, and you just wouldn't even really think about them absent strong intervention. So what are we talking about specifically? Number one, which I think is giving us 2020 vibes, but work from home.
Work from home where possible.
The politics of this, big P and little p politics of this have shifted around a bit over time. But it's still the case that's for those who can, that's a extremely familiar change to twiddle a bit more. And yes, people, including my own organisation, have been enthusiastic about getting more people into the office more days for vibrant collaboration. And vibrant collaboration is wonderful, but also,
Tenet says from his own home office.
Yes, that's right. I fear the big blue thing that I see when I go out my safe doors.
You bike into work. I
do.
Your commute isn't costing anyone oil. Anyway.
Oh, that's true. But anyway, work from home, you could do that. Cut speed limits by 10 kilometres an hour. A bit of work for sign installers, but you could do that, couldn't you?
Well, so I wonder about so this is one of those ones where I had practical thoughts about enforcement and stuff, because on some highways you've now got the digital speed signs, which pretty easy to change those.
Yep.
But then when you're getting into more rural areas and just sort of outside those major, more metro centres where you see that kind of stuff, I don't know if you basically, a lot of these things actually require pretty large-scale public comms and awareness campaigning, which is something that just speaking, frankly, hasn't been a thing, in the last little while when it comes to Like, I don't know. I mean,
except for COVID.
Except for COVID. But when it comes to sort of energy use and like, I mean, I think we've talked about the role of public awareness and comms campaign on things like efficiency measures and things like that. But I mean, it's also fair to say there hasn't been a huge amount of interest from government in the absence of crisis conditions like this for those kind of campaigns that I would say like were a little bit more common in the past around things.
And an interesting question. This is a bit of a mentat attitude. Ooh, interesting. Has the effectiveness of a potential campaign, like how does that look in terms of willingness to listen and to take on board information and public urgings? How does that look today versus how it looked in March of 2020? And we've just seen we may be talking about in bonus content soon an electoral episode in which the surging poll numbers for One Nation were translated to some degree into actual measured voting reality. There's a little cohort of people who are like, everything's nonsense. We don't believe anything except what we hear from our favoured counterintuitive sources. And so is there going to be like, I don't know, diesel denialism? Or are people going to go, oh, yeah, this is a really concrete, like I can't see a virus, but I can see that there's no petrol at my local, although that's not the case in Australia right now. We're well supplied with fuel today. I don't know if people will listen. I hope they will.
I do think that there is merit in governments proceeding with caution, at least being alive to the sense of exhaustion that the public might feel about these sorts of campaigns, and the way that there is a part of Australian society that is very kind of like reflexively antagonistic to the idea of any sort of coordinated action or any sort of messaging from government. So that's something you need to really be alive to and bake into your strategy.
Narrowcast your messages, like adapt for different audiences. I think for some people, like World War II propaganda posters saying, when you drive alone, you drive with Donald Trump, might have a lot of resonance, and other people will maybe not react so well.
All the way with Day GT.
Oh, God. No, I've completely forgotten where I was going to go now that you've
That's the power of a good idea whose time has come, Frankie.
Invoked unwanted mental imagery. I think that by offering up a menu of these options, I think the invitation is for countries to look at what is likely to resonate or work in their context and do as much of it as possible. I think they also kind of hasten to say these things will all contribute and every sort of incremental bit of things like this are all helpful and good, but nothing is going to substitute for the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz ultimately, to deal with the overarching issue. So it's really clear in that respect. But things that I could see, like just so we've been talking about some of the road transport options that have been floated. Things that I could well and truly see, because they have been successful here in the past, are encouraging more use of public transport, for example. And through COVID, you saw some state governments making public transport free on some days of the week to encourage, initially I think that was in response to trying to get people back into cities and interested in all of that lovely in-person collaboration. But that did, there was some success in running initiatives like that. So getting people to shift where they can from using their cars to doing more public transport, mode shifting from cars to buses and trains is something you could see working here. I mean, I'm like carpooling being a thing that exists in a policy document, also just a little funny on one level because it literally
app platform supported rideshare.
That's it. The one that I have never seen, like they did give examples of this happening elsewhere in the world. I'm not familiar with this ever having been done here, but the idea of restricting access of vehicles to parts of large cities on different days of the week. So basically, if you are an odd numbered number plate, no Melbourne CBD for you on a Tuesday. That's kind of like, I think that feels like one that would be very hard to enforce.
Yeah, well, it is done in some parts of the world, and a paper that we nearly covered for this episode, talking about EV uptake incentives in Shanghai in China, included the information that, odd even restrictions on ICE vehicles is a part, and a part that people feel pretty grumpy about and keen for any way out of, which is the incentive you got for a while in Shanghai for driving an EV. You could drive into the city anytime you wanted. I agree, bit of a culture shock in Australia to impose that one. Maybe if we were in actually feeling really deep insecurity, really deep, then anything's on the table.
It is kind of like before a pandemic happens and there's like a virus circulating in the community asking people to wear face masks on public transport, when there's not like a live and present kind of risk, like, there's just a different quality of conversation that you can have when it's immediate. And there were a couple of other things there that sort of sit in the road transport category. I wanted just kind of really good thinking around how you encourage, I guess, more efficient driving practices, but probably more for the commercial end of the spectrum, so more your kind of heavy trucks and sort of good delivery end of the spectrum. And that's sort of talking about stuff like checking your tyre pressure regularly and reducing idling and not braking and accelerating so much. So kind of keeping lower speeds more consistently. That, like, it all makes a lot of sense. I did have a question around, and me not being very plugged into that industry, like do things like that, would that present a bit of a culture shock in that industry, or, would that be something that practically would be hard to achieve overnight when you've got, kind of got a workforce of people that have been doing things the way they are and have been for a long time? Like, how much of that is sort of suggesting more training versus, other things?
Well, the standard response to this kind of urging is to say, and this is a thing that all of us in different sectors may have said at different times. We are already as efficient as it makes sense to be. And if the prices change, then we will adjust to reflect those prices. Reality is definitely messier than that, but there are strong commercial incentives to react to high fuel prices, unless, of course, you take policy steps to try and mask those changes in the price of fuel. And that there have been some requests, including from the Australian Trucking Association, for things like temporarily suspending the heavy vehicle road user charge to take a bite out of these diesel price increases. And the problem with that kind of idea, of course, is it's a thing you can argue about whether that's a good use of money or not, when prices have just gone up for some reason, and it's painful, but it's not a crisis. If prices have gone up because supply has gone down and you cut taxes or make payments to people in order that they can pretend that prices haven't risen, you don't get the demand reduction impact, and therefore prices will be bid up further till you get that reaction. So we do need to think about equity, and there's some good stuff in this short paper about the different tools that governments have used to try and address affordability and social equity from recent energy price spikes and what they could do in future. But you do have to think about how is the actual reaction of cutting demand to meet an acute reduction in supply going to play out, and are you undercutting that inadvertently by the design of an assistance policy?
I reckon that guidance around better driving practices in freight, I'd bundle that together with some suggestions later in the paper in terms of like the implementation of energy management systems in industry. And I think the dynamic that Tennant describes is really accurate. Like, you know, everybody reckons that they've got the absolutely optimal amount of time, energy and investment in energy efficiency, energy management. But people don't know what they don't know. And these are moments of opportunity to kind of have another look at your systems and processes and go, oh, look, you know, a bit of training or some optimization here or there, we can actually eke out some efficiency improvements regularly in the order of 5, 10, 15% in industrial businesses. They quote 10% in this document. And so I guess and this goes a little bit to the commentary that you put forward earlier, Frankie, around this document being very much focused on like the short-term measures that can be undertaken, which goes to effectively optimization in the best case, because you're not in a position necessarily to do a whole bunch of capital equipment replacement. And I feel more sympathetic to the IEA on this. I feel like they're alive to the state of mind of the governments that will be reading this document, which is kind of like crisis mode. How do we intervene to kind of, you know, moderate the impacts of this situation right now? Larding it up with a whole bunch of sort of wish lists, nice to haves out into the future. I don't know how well that would necessarily land. I think there's absolutely the case for a follow-up document, which is, you know, setting out that longer term agenda, and that is something we should absolutely be alive to. But we are in a world of behaviour change. We are in the world of optimisation. We are in the world of kind of eking out those improvements at the margins that can just take the pressure off a little bit. And we're taking the pressure off both for households and businesses in terms of their own energy price impacts, but also taking the pressure off in terms of the entire system. So yeah, I do think like there's an interesting balancing act for the government who are honestly just trying to lower the temperature on this whole situation.
Glad somebody is.
Other political actors are trying to crank the temperature up, just smashing that thermostat, pushing it as high as it possibly can. They're trying to take the temperature down. And so there's an interesting question around how you kind of message some of these things, which in the broad could be quite sensible for people to do. But like, how do you introduce those ideas at the appropriate moment? Given that at the moment, like to the degree that there's any sort of supply constraints, they're being driven by increased demand, much more than a diminution of supply. So it's three-dimensional chess, right? Yeah. Because if you pull the lever on some of this stuff, does that sort of lessen concern in the community? Because there's a sense the government's on it and they're encouraging us to do sensible things. Or is it like, oh shit, there really is a problem?
Yeah.
Stockpile.
Yeah. Well, and I just think, we didn't come up so great when we were asked not to keep buying toilet paper during COVID, like bare supermarket shelves for long periods of time. There is a dynamic here which, if you could take a bit of time to think strategically about, you could try and harness rather than work against. So let's just like just kind of calling out things that have been touched on here on the way through, right? The political mood, in parts of the country is very much wanting to blow the ship up in terms of the rise of One Nation support, at least in South Australia being an early proof point. And much of that, you could link to kind of agency as well. Like, I want to, on the one hand, I don't buy what you're selling and I just want to try something completely different. When we kind of bring that into the energy space, the things that have been wildly successful in recent times and kind of across the political spectrum are those things that play into giving people agency and ownership and independence, installing batteries on their homes, installing solar, kind of taking control of their own situation. So I think that there could be a way that you could approach some of these things with that lens that gets you maybe, not in the position of telling people that are already sick to death of government telling you what to do more across more of your life.
I can sense an Energy Sovereignty Now t-shirt in our future, Frankie.
100%. That's right.
Well,
man.
The thing that people can most obviously do, although also obviously it's not quite as simple as just saying, go out and do this, to take control of their exposure to petrol or diesel prices is to go out and buy an electric vehicle, which has been sort of associated for a while with inner city, green-tinged, wealthy professionals, and is rapidly becoming much more accessible and ought to become more mainstream. But it is a thing that people can do that takes back control. And there needs to be, I think, both work to brand this as something that is individually helpful and nationally beneficial. I think saying nationally beneficial might be more potent than socially beneficial. And to think about how policy impacts this, because if it is about for an important cohort of people who it would be great if they made this switch, if it is about autonomy and taking back control, then we need to be careful about some of the ideas out there for policies in this space. You could argue back and forth about the wisdom of taking away the EV tax credit. I don't think that really goes either way in the autonomy zone. But if we're going to do some kind of zany new road use charging system, road usage fee, which personally I think is a great idea, you do not want to make that feel very onerous in how you comply with it. You don't want to be doing things that you don't want to be forcing EV drivers to offer grid services or fear that they're going to be forced to do that. You want to give people options. So but the more people take that option, the better. And Frankie, I have promoted a t-shirt concept to you, and I will keep promoting that concept.
You have. I'm here for it.
T-shirt concepts.
No, I think it's an abundance conversation.
Aligned.
At least when it comes to t-shirt production, I'm in favour of the abundance approach. Hang
on, Ted, you've got to pitch your t-shirt.
Imagine.
In a world.
Imagine you see a t-shirt or a bumper sticker.
Bumper sticker. I like the bumper sticker because
all right.
You can stick it on a car.
Are you signing up for the infrastructure that would be required to deliver this bumper sticker?
We'll just assume that infrastructure. It's easy. Don't worry about it, Luke. It's fine. A smiling, actually a shouting, slouch hat wearing digger, as seen on World War I recruitment posters, standing in front of an EV, holding a plug and crying out, "Charge." I think that situates.
It's punny and inspiring.
That's correct.
I think it could be a winner.
Inspiration is our national way. Anyway, there's room for many approaches to this in this world. There are many bumpers on which to stick.
Well, if the Australian government is casting about for partners,
this idea free
with credibility
to our nation's government. Consider
this
it
message
this
brought to you by the Let Me Sum Up podcast.
That's right.
Bit for
Ready
our
to
nation.
serve. Ready to serve. All right. Well, we haven't talked about the couple of things that sit in the sort of air transport, cooking fuel industry bit. So it might just be worth very quickly touching on those. And I think we've kind of got to the meat of this conversation already. Do you?
The air transport bit's easy. Just fly less.
Just fly less. But
Now,
I
they
think
focus on business travel.
Yeah.
Which could go down, and it could. For Australia, I wonder, I've been actually chatting with a colleague about whether we're going to see a big reaction in international tourism. That cuts, because that's more than international aviation, not just tourism, is more than half of Australia's jet fuel consumption. There's going to be a bunch of people who respond to price and also a bunch of people who just physically can't get here.
Yeah. Yep. So some of that might be taken out of our hands anyway. But, so I think that's a message for business, and people to consider where you don't have to be travelling for work, avoid air travel. So it'll be interesting to see whether and how that plays out in terms of the domestic, the international piece. I was really pleased to see them highlight up front the switch to modern cooking solutions, electric definitely in the mix, but, also important to acknowledge that IEA is, obviously sort of taking a worldwide view on this and the way that people cook around the world has had to pretty significant health impacts, like particularly in developing countries where biomass has been used for cooking for a long time. There's been like a long-run concerted effort to shift away from those sources of fuel like charcoal and other things that have awful health impacts in those countries where that's happening indoors in spaces that aren't well ventilated. And so they definitely, don't. And I think that the suggestion in this paper is they are seeing some early signs in response to reduced access to LPG, which is the thing that if you haven't been shifting to, induction or electric cooking, that you've been switching to that kind of fuel, that there has been this reversion to biomass, which would be a terrible outcome from a global health perspective. So I think that kind of ties to some of the other ask around here, which is really seeing what could be done in the kind of business industry space to reduce or free up supplies of LPG to, sort of focus and on making that available for household cooking use, where that's needed. I was interested in your thoughts on that one tenet around flexibility of feedstocks for chemical processes.
Yeah, well, we don't do as much chemical processing in Australia as we did 10 or 15 years ago. But the degree of flexibility, there is a lot that goes in, says me, arts law graduate, to running a refinery and managing the inputs, the degree of refining, the additives that may be needed for different products. There is flexibility there, but it will take effort and time. I think freeing up LPG is a good idea. We don't think of it as much as, well, I don't think of it as much as a cooking fuel in this country, rather a transport fuel. And I think if we can free some up, that is good. But how much will we free up for the region with action here? I don't know.
Well, we did talk about this at the top of the paper, but there is a section at the back of the document, only a couple of pages. I think, Luke, we're on the same page. I have sympathy for focusing on the immediate kind of response measures that can be done quickly. I do think, though, you can't consider the messaging here, in a vacuum, and there is a political context here that's relevant. But just worth flagging that, the IEA is calling for combining those immediate actions with more structural measures, which is good. It's just sort of done in a very low-key way at the back of the document. So they do call out reinforcing adoption of EVs. We should circle back to the plug-in hybrid piece of that quickly, because I know Tennant had views and I also have things to say there. We're also in an environment where there's a couple of big ticket policy reviews this year that are very relevant, in the sense that the new vehicle efficiency standard is up for review. The IEA is saying you should be raising the ambition of fuel economy standards for road vehicles. And, we know that that was set to be, a bit contested. So hopefully this strengthens the arm to keep and maintain and increase the ambition of those standards here.
Just on that, there has been, prior to this crisis, some rowing back in Europe of fuel efficiency, not complete rowing back, but a moderation and pushing for more moderation of the requirements that were going to heavily promote electrification of transport in the 2030s and on the way through. And, of course, in the US, we've seen just a complete bonfire of vehicle efficiency and emissions regulation. And there was going, notwithstanding the government's 2035 emissions targets, which imply accelerating transition in light vehicle space, there was going to be a rearguard action against the new vehicle efficiency standard. All of that seems 100% bonkers in an environment of global oil shock. And it's hard to make the dial of vehicle efficiency standards produce very large results in the next few years, but the long-term value of having effective standards helping to transform the fleet is pretty obvious.
Let's hope that's the spirit in which that's approached. We've touched on a couple of these things already around modern cooking solutions, so going electric where you can. Luke's point on energy management systems in industry, really good to see that highlighted here. They talk about the replacement of oil heating systems and industrial boilers with heat pumps. So heat pumps, one of our favourite technologies on this here podcast, heat pumps for all. And then there's, towards the back, one point around increasing plastic waste collection, reuse and recycling. So obviously a lot of plastic products have been single use. So just, I guess it's the circular economy piece of this platform, which is nice to see. And then they, it's last probably for a reason, which has got maybe the slightly longer ramp up, but they are calling for the scaling up of sustainable fuels, I think particularly in the aviation context. So not an immediate term prospect, but things that need to be worked towards.
Efficiency, electrification, renewables, energy sovereignty now.
All good messages.
Sounds like a T-shirt with a back.
Oh, God. Here we go.
As always, we close out the show with one more thing, in which we all share something that is currently captivating our attention. Tennant, what have you got?
I've got a real downer. but a useful downer to keep in mind, given everything else that we've been talking about this episode. There was a paper that came out in February from, among others, Germany's Fraunhofer Institute, basically German CSIRO, analysing the data from 1 million plus European cars that are connected over the air back to manufacturers and can report a lot of data, including real-world fuel consumption data. And this team has been analysing this data for a few different reasons to get a real-world grounding to compare what regulators calculate or measure in specific test cycles the fuel use and the emissions of different sorts of vehicle to be. And this report is focusing specifically on plug-in hybrid vehicles that don't just have the hybrid drivetrain that we were familiar with from the last couple of decades, but which can be plugged in to charge, not just charging the battery from regenerative braking with energy ultimately coming from the petrol engine. And what they find is, I mean, they don't use this phrase, but plug-in hybrids on average seem to be a bit shit. In that they are not being plugged in nearly as much as the test cycles assume. So you can plug them in and run them off the battery more often, but nobody's forcing you to do so, and you might forget. And a lot of people do forget. But the other thing is, it turns out that many of these vehicles are using the petrol engine more often than assumed, even during battery discharge mode. And so the minimum level of fuel consumption is higher than assumed. And on average in the sample, it was, I think, 2.8 litres per 100 kilometres driven, which is a lot higher than you might think, and a lot higher, in fact, than like 3 times higher. You know, all up, the fuel consumption from these vehicles was 3 times higher than the regulated test cycle indicated. And so all that's to say, whatever your policies or your personal purchasing approaches to taking back autonomy and control, you want to be surer that you're actually getting a good deal. There may be better designs. There may be ways to ensure that plug-in hybrid vehicles are delivering what people hope for them to do. But in Europe, the data is saying they are not today. And if an pure EV is like available and workable for you, it probably will do what it says on the tin. Downer delivered. Somebody give us something better.
Okay, Frankie, what have you got?
I'm going to bring us back up, and this is a nice little revisit of my last One More Thing, where I was saying hopefully...
Oh, is this methane corner? Is that where we are?
Yeah, 100%. I think this is...
I need more alliteration. What about methane mezzanine?
Ooh. I love that for me, but like mezzanine kind of like... It's like the purgatory of building levels, like, and I don't want to give the impression that we're on that, you know, that we're not going, you know, to the penthouse with this. I'll think about that, but for right now, I'll take it. I just want to circle back, and it's kind of delightful to see that whilst I had flagged that the New South Wales EPA, you know, had been actively considering regulating coal mine methane emissions, they've actually come out and said that they're doing it. It's just like pretty great to see what I thought might have been a slightly longer drawn out consideration not to be, and that under the new kind of the phase-in of these requirements, large, and this is applying to underground coal mines, must flare or use gas drained from mines with a high concentration of methane burning it, basically. So it's all not great, but it's less bad than just letting the methane spew into the air, which we know has a very high global warming potential and more significant near-term consequences. There'll also be requirements to minimise leaks from old mine workings by resealing mines and install significantly a ventilation air methane or VAM abatement technology, which means that where methane emissions exceed a sort of certain concentration, it basically combusts that methane, like it sort of is able to extract it and hive it off and destroy the methane. So that's very exciting and just really good to see a regulator, this is going to sound mean, have a spine, like do it, like actually not just talk about it, but do it. No, I'm really...
Take that, all the other regulators.
You haven't been named, but you have been shamed.
I just think... No, I'm
Own
just
it, Frankie.
like, that's it. Yeah, I am. That's fine. It's good to see it. And like the reality is like VAM technology in use in lots of places around the world because companies are required to. So like the fact that it hasn't been happening here is simply because there haven't been requirements to do it. And there's now an imperative, for these sources of emissions to be cracked down on. And I think you'll start to see some of that borne out by different, analysis being commissioned by folks looking ahead to the Safeguard review this year. I think actually that review will highlight a lot of areas where some specific response to the issue of methane emissions is warranted. So what a positive counterpoint to Tennant's shitty news on hybrids.
And that was this week's edition of Moscovich's Methane Musings.
All right. I love it. TM. That's another T-shirt. I know at least two people that might want that T-shirt, at least the Methane Musings bit of it.
For my one more thing, I'm going to do some shameless promotion of an initiative associated with my gig at the EEC. We have a national conference that's coming up in May. Checks the website. Wednesday the 27th and Thursday the 28th of May 2026 in Sydney at the UNSW Roundhouse. And I have a public service announcement because a couple of years ago we held an event at the UNSW Roundhouse and we had global efficiency luminary Amory Lovins, and we promoted the hell out of this, did our best, we thought, to make it clear to the world that Amory was with us. But for months afterwards, I had people come up to me going, was he there in person?
Oh, no.
And they just assumed, because this is a thing that happens at conferences these days, is that, they Zoom people in. And such a leading light of the efficiency movement, there's no way that he'd be schlepping it down to Australia. But actually he had, and people were sad. So I'm using this platform to alert the world that we have another exciting keynote at the EEC National Conference. One Michael Liebreich, founder of Bloomberg New Energy Finance, current host of famed climate and energy podcast, Cleaning Up.
Complimentary.
Sure.
Why, what a wonderful mutual podcast appearance exchange that would be. Hey, Michael.
And for the avoidance of doubt, I want to make it clear to all our beloved listeners that Michael is joining us in person, live, on stage, in the flesh.
Not a hologram.
Corporeal form, present and correct on day one of the EEC National Conference. So if you wish to breathe the same air, some of the same air as Michael Liebreich.
Rarefied air.
Okay. You just got a bit creepy.
You should buy a ticket to our conference. And if you listen to both podcasts, this podcast and the other complimentary podcast, there will be a conversation between Michael and I. So there will be something of a crossover event happening at that time. there'll be a link in the show notes. I guess run, don't walk. Am I allowed to repurpose the...
I don't.
Be nice, Menzel. Be nice.
We applied for a patent, an intellectual patent on the process of running, not walking, but it was denied.
Go get yourself a ticket and you too can bask in the glory of a very much here in Australia Michael Liebreich. I'll leave it there. I think that's my log rolling for at least the next 6 months. That is our show almost done, but every fortnight after the show we record a bonus episode called There Is Too Much, in which we pour ourselves a drink, relax, and cover something we didn't have time for on the main show. Tennant, what political earthquake are we covering this week?
Well, I'm informed, checking my notes, that there is a place called South Australia that has its own government and laws and elections from time to time, and one of those just happened. What happened in it, and what does it mean for the climate and energy of it all, and for the future of national politics, and actually what does it mean for South Australia, because that's a place that matters, despite my gentle Melburnian ribbing.
If you are not entirely put off by Tennant's like shade throwing across the border to our friends in South Australia.
Look, I hear all the time from businesses who are like, South Australia is a much better place to be than Victoria. So, they're winning. They can take a little bit of ribbing.
You should, once you've run, not walked, to buy a ticket to the EC National Conference, you can run, don't walk, to which website?
Oh, God.
To South Australia. There you can go to letmesumup.net.
You can click on Support LMSU at the top of the page. You can find your way to our Patreon, and you can sign up for the low price of $10 a month, and you too can access what is developing into like a stealth political commentary podcast in the bonus content feed.
I mean, let's face it, it's stuff that we just want to talk about anyway. So
it's good stuff, and there's plenty to unpack. So if you want our thoughts on that, go have at it. That is our show for today. This podcast was edited by energy professional and podcast tragic Mark Spencer from Here Media Studio. Frankie, you like promoting things. What are you going to promote today?
Well, I might remind folks that whilst there's no doubt to be a plethora of abundance of new T-shirt designs on the merch page shortly, there are the classic merch offerings still available, and I think despite saying to you all that the More Sufficiency Now T-shirt was a limited edition, 1 month only type thing, I think I reinstated it on the merch page a while ago because you, Menzel, wanted to take your family to the print shop and get their choice of the full range of T-shirts, and I never took it down. So More Sufficiency Now. If you are on that train and you did not buy a T-shirt at the time, just know it's still there. Printing on demand.
Unlimited sufficiency.
Unlimited sufficiency.
Are you saying, Muscovich, that when we circle back to put up the new T-shirts, the sufficiency T-shirt may go away? So this is, in fact, a time-bound offer.
Not really. I wasn't proposing to do that.
Okay.
But
so really no urgency at all.
I'm just making folks aware, because I'm regularly approached by people when I'm wearing my More Sufficiency Now T-shirt. I take my dog for walks in the inner west of Sydney, and I've had at least a couple of people come up to me and go, "That's a great T-shirt." I'm like, my people, you can get one. I'll give you the link to the website. Just get onto it. Still a great T-shirt.
Meander at your leisure.
Walk your dog to letmesumup.net.
Very good. meandering's good. We can have some more meandering in our life in these stressful times. For Frankie Muskovich and Tennant Reid, I'm Luke Menzel. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.